I noticed the light under my door before I even touched the handle. It was 11:48 on a Thursday night. I'd just gotten off a 6-hour drive from Ottawa, and the light under my door meant someone was inside my apartment. Someone who was not me. I stood in the hallway with my duffel bag still on my shoulder and my keys already in my hand, trying to remember if I'd left a lamp on. I hadn't. I never do. I'm the person who checks the stove twice before leaving for work, let alone for 4 days. I knocked on my own door, which felt ridiculous, but I knocked. 30 seconds later it opened, and Gemma was standing there in one of my old university hoodies. The gray one with the cracked Carlton logo, holding a mug of tea like she'd been expecting me. "You look terrible," she said. "You're in my apartment," I said. "Your building manager let me in." There was a thing. What kind of thing? She stepped back to let me inside. And that's when I saw the sleeping bag on my couch, the small suitcase by the kitchen island, and the half-eaten container of leftover pad thai on my coffee table that I was fairly certain I had been looking forward to since somewhere around Brockville. "My landlord sold the building," Gemma said, sitting back down and pulling her knees up. "New owner's doing a gut reno. We had 30 days notice, but I kind of didn't process it until last week." "When did you move out?" "Yesterday, and you called Victor?" Victor was my building manager. He was 63, retired from CN Rail, and apparently had no boundary when it came to a woman who smiled at him. "I brought him butter tarts," Gemma said, "from that place on Elgin." I set my bag down. I looked at my pad thai. I looked at her. Gemma had been one of my closest friends since second year, when we'd been paired together in a group project neither of us wanted to do, and had ended up spending 12 hours in a study room arguing about supply chain inefficiency and somehow becoming friends instead of enemies. She'd moved to the Glebe 3 years ago. She was loud and organized and could argue a point until you forgot what the original point was. She was also, apparently, now living on my couch. "How long?" I asked. "Until I find something in Ottawa right now." She had the decency to look slightly pained. "I have 4 viewings next week." I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stood there for a moment with both hands on the counter, staring at the backsplash tile I'd picked out myself and was still quietly proud of. "Okay," I said. "Yeah? Okay. But we need rules." She smiled into her mug. "Obviously. The rules, as established that Thursday night at approximately midnight on a yellow legal pad Gemma produced from her suitcase like she'd been planning this. 1. I get the bathroom first on weekdays. No exceptions, no negotiating. I have to be at the office by 8:30, and she works remote, so there is no equivalence here. 2. The pad thai incident is forgiven, but will not be repeated. My leftovers are clearly labeled with my name and a small drawing of a skull and crossbones. Her leftovers are labeled with her name and whatever she feels like drawing, which turns out to be mostly flowers. 3. She does her calls in the second bedroom, which I use as a home office, during hours we agree on in advance. I agreed to this more readily than I should have, because I thought she meant 1 or 2 calls a day. She does not mean 1 or 2 calls a day. She works in marketing, and apparently spends 6 hours of every workday on calls, which I know because I can hear fragments of them through the wall and have inadvertently learned more about quarterly content calendars than any engineer should ever have to know. 4. Shared grocery costs split evenly, tallied weekly, settled via e-transfer. This is the most successful rule. It also results in us spending 45 minutes in the superstore on a Saturday afternoon arguing about whether oat milk counts as a household staple or a personal preference. For the record, I think it's a personal preference. She thinks I'm wrong. I paid for half of it. She found one apartment that week. She rejected it because of the windows. She said the natural light was hostile. I did not ask what that meant because I could tell she would explain it at length, and I had a deadline. The second week she had a viewing canceled, one rescheduled, and one she went to and described to me as promising but haunted. I asked if she meant structurally. She said no, she meant spiritually. I ate my dinner. By week 3, I had stopped noticing that her shampoo was in my shower, and her book was on the arm of the couch, and her coffee mug, the one that says "but first, chaos," was in the rotation with my mugs like it had always been there. I'd also stopped noticing that she remembered how I took my coffee without asking, and that she turned the TV volume down when I had my Thursday project calls, and that when I came home tired from a long day, she somehow already knew and didn't try to fill the silence. I noticed all of that separately, later. At the time, I just thought she was a good roommate. The thing about Ryan is that nobody who knew Gemma liked Ryan. I had met him twice, and both times I had come away with the vague sense that something was slightly off. The way you feel when you're reading a document, and something in the formatting is wrong, but you can't immediately find it. He was perfectly pleasant. He smiled at the right moments. He asked follow-up questions. He was also, according to literally everyone who'd spent more than 20 minutes with him, completely incapable of being straightforwardly honest about anything. He'd been Gemma's ex for about 8 months. They'd broken up in January. She didn't talk about it much, and I didn't push, because that's the way we'd always operated. She told me things when she was ready, and I didn't extract information like a deposition. He texted her in the third week. I know because she was sitting at the kitchen island when I came home on a Wednesday, and she had the particular kind of stillness she gets when something's annoying her and she's deciding whether to be annoyed by it out loud or not. Ryan texted, she said, before I even asked. Okay, I said. He wants to get coffee. To talk. I put my keys on the hook by the door. What do you want to do? I want to respond with a single period and leave him on read, she said. But I also want to hear what he has to say so I can have the closure I never got and then close the door completely. Those are two different outcomes. I know. One of them involves talking to Ryan. I know, she said more quietly. I got a glass of water. I thought about it. If you go, I said, and it goes sideways, text me. I'll call you with a fake emergency. She looked at me. You would do that? I called Priya with a fake emergency once when she was stuck at a birthday party she didn't want to be at. It's in my skill set. Gemma laughed. It was the real kind, not the polite kind, the one that caught slightly in her throat and made her look younger. She didn't go for coffee with Ryan. She sent him a very short, very precise message that I did not read but that she reported took her 4 drafts to get right, and that was the end of it. I told myself the feeling I had, reading her face when she said that's done, was just the normal relief of watching someone you care about make the right call. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. The night it actually changed was a Friday in early November. We'd had a miscommunication about plans. I thought she was going to her friend Theo's thing. She thought I was going to my coworker's birthday thing, and both of us had quietly opted out of our respective obligations and come home to find the other one already there. It was the first time we'd both been home on a Friday with nowhere to be. She'd made pasta, I'd bought wine, a Niagara Riesling I'd been saving for something I couldn't name, and a Friday that felt like I had nowhere to be seemed close enough. We ate at the kitchen island because the table had her laptop and my drafting tubes and a week's worth of mail on it, which was a kind of archaeology I wasn't ready to deal with. She asked me about the Ottawa project, and I explained more of it than I normally would, because she actually listened and asked follow-up questions that were surprisingly on point for someone whose job involved no structural engineering whatsoever. I told her that, and she threw a piece of pen at me, which missed and landed behind the stove, which neither of us could retrieve, which she found much funnier than I did. After dinner, she put on a documentary she'd been telling me about for weeks. Something about a cartographer in the 1700s who'd mapped coastlines based on sound, tapping the hull of a ship to hear the echo off the land. I'd been skeptical. I was not skeptical after watching it. It was genuinely one of the best things I'd watched in years, and I said so, and she said, I told you. In the way she has that is somehow not annoying, even though it should be. We were on opposite ends of the couch, which had become the default configuration. She had a blanket. I had the remote. Somewhere in the second half, she'd shifted sideways a bit. Not dramatically, just enough that when I turned to say something about the thing happening on screen, her face was closer than I expected. I didn't say the thing I was going to say. I don't remember what it was anymore. I just remember that she was looking at the screen, and then she looked at me, and there was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but felt much longer. What? She said. Nothing, I said. She looked at me a half-second longer than normal. Then she looked back at the screen. I did not fall asleep for a long time that night. I want to be clear that I am not someone who usually misreads things. I work in structural engineering. I build load-bearing models. I am professionally trained to assess what holds weight and what doesn't. And yet I spent the entire next week convincing myself the moment on the couch had been nothing, because the alternative, that it had been something, was too disruptive to the structural model of what Gemma and I were. We were friends. She was staying on my couch until she found a place. She was going to find a place, and then she'd leave, and everything would go back to normal. And normal was working fine. Normal had been fine for years. Except, she'd started leaving me a cup of coffee in the mornings without saying anything about it, just left on the counter with the exact amount of oat milk I'd been converted to, against my will. She texted me a photo of a building under construction she'd walked past because it reminded her of something I'd said about cantilever design 3 weeks ago. She remembered things I'd mentioned once in passing and produced them back to me weeks later like she'd filed them in a place specifically for me. I mentioned this to my coworker Darren, obliquely, without context. I said I thought maybe I was confused about a situation. Darren told me I was probably in love with whoever it was and that I should deal with it immediately because his cousin had waited 2 years and it had not worked out. I told him I was not in love with anyone. Darren nodded in the way that people nod when they're not agreeing with you. There is an IKEA in the east end of Ottawa, which should not be as dramatic a setting for a turning point as it turned out to be. Gemma's friend had lent her a small shelf unit that needed a replacement part, and she needed a second person to navigate the parking lot, and I needed a new set of kitchen drawer organizers. So we went together on a Sunday afternoon in October, like two functional adults. IKEA on a Sunday is its own kind of wilderness. You go in thinking you'll be efficient, and you come out 90 minutes later with things you didn't know you needed, and a mild existential experience in the lighting section. We were in there for 2 hours. We ate meatballs. We argued about whether the bookshelf she was eyeing was practical, given that she was, theoretically, going to move into her own apartment at some undetermined future point. If you buy it, I said, you're going to have to move it twice. Or, she said, I'll just leave it at yours until I have somewhere to put it. That's not a plan. That's a postponement. Those are the same thing sometimes. We were standing in the middle of the showroom floor, and she was saying that casually, like it was nothing, like she hadn't just implied that she might keep leaving things at my apartment indefinitely. And something about the casualness of it made my chest feel like a poorly designed load-bearing wall. Technically still standing, but not by much. I bought the drawer organizers. She did not buy the bookshelf. We drove home mostly in silence, but the comfortable kind with the radio on low and the city going dark outside the windows. When we pulled into the parking garage, she said, "Thank you for coming with me. You needed a second person for the parking lot." "I also just wanted to go with you," she said. Then she got out of the car before I could figure out what to do with that. She found an apartment in November. It was in Centertown, 2 bedrooms, good light, non-hostel, available December 1st. She showed me the listing on her phone, and I said all the right things. Great location, reasonable price for Ottawa, good building. I meant all of them. I also felt something drop in my chest that I didn't have clean language for. That week, she started quietly organizing her things. Not dramatically, she wasn't staging it, but I noticed. Her books moved from the side table back into her suitcase. The "but first" chaos mug ended up in the drying rack one morning and did not come back out. I didn't say anything for 3 days. I told myself this was because it was her decision and I had no standing to complicate it. I told myself she was my friend and she needed her own space and I was happy for her. Both of those things were true. A third thing was also true, which was that my apartment was going to feel like a completely different structure without her in it, and I had no idea what to do about that. On a Wednesday night, about a week before she was supposed to sign the lease, we were both in the kitchen after dinner. She was washing, I was drying. We'd settled into this without discussing it somewhere around week 2, and she handed me a pan and said, "You've been quiet. I'm often quiet. You've been differently quiet." I set the pan on the counter. Differently how? She turned off the tap. She turned to look at me with the particular expression she has when she's decided to say the thing she's been not saying, which I have seen exactly 3 times in the years I've known her, and which usually precedes something that restructures the conversation completely. "I looked at the apartment again yesterday," she said. "Centertown? Yeah, I waited. I don't know if I want it," she said. I didn't speak for a moment. The kitchen felt very quiet. Why not? She looked at me steadily. Gemma does not look away from things. It is one of the qualities I've always admired about her and found slightly difficult to be on the receiving end of. Because I like being here, she said. And I'm not sure the thing is I like about being here is just the apartment. I understood exactly what she meant. I had understood it for weeks. I had just been waiting for her to say it first, because I was, apparently, capable of calculating the load tolerance of a cantilevered concrete balcony under asymmetric snow load and completely incapable of saying how I felt about a person out loud before they did. I've been trying to figure out, I said, how to tell you that I don't want you to leave. Without it being unfair to say, why would it be unfair? Because you needed somewhere to stay. And I didn't want you to feel like there were conditions on that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, do you think I don't know the difference between someone who's being kind because they feel obligated and someone who's being kind because they want to? I think you're very smart and you probably know the difference. I do, she said. I've known the difference for a while. I handed her back the pan, which she still hadn't dried. She took it without looking at it. So, she said, the apartment in Centertown, I think I might cancel the viewing. That seems reasonable. We'd need new rules, she said. Different ones. We were always good at rules. She smiled. It was the real kind, the one I'd been cataloging without meaning to for weeks. We're going to have to actually talk about the oat milk, she said. The oat milk is a personal preference. The oat milk is a household staple, and you're going to have to accept that. I did not accept it in that moment. I accepted it later, technically, officially, along with a number of other things that shifted the whole architecture of what we were. Quietly, without fanfare, in a kitchen, in a mid-rise, on the edge of the glebe, on a Wednesday night, in November, with a drying rack full of dishes, and a pan neither of us was holding anymore. She signed a lease eventually. It was for a different apartment, the one we found together in late spring, the one with the second bedroom she could use for calls, and the light she described as cooperative rather than hostile, and my name was on it too. The but first, Chaos mug never left the rotation. I stopped thinking of it as hers.